The morning light spilled through the small diner windows, touching everything with a soft golden glow. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the sound of clinking cups and quiet chatter. Behind the counter, a young waitress moved quickly, her apron tied neatly, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was always calm, always gentle, and no one really knew much about her beyond her polite smile. Most people just called her the girl with the calm eyes. She had been working there for almost 2 years. Every day looked almost the same. She opened the diner before sunrise, setting up the tables, wiping down the counter, and making sure the coffee machine was ready for the morning rush. The regular customers liked her, though she didn't talk much about herself. She had a way of listening that made others open up, even if she rarely shared her own story. Outside, the streets of the small town were quiet. Life moved slowly there. People worked hard, earned just enough, and spent their evenings watching TV or sitting on their porches. In that simple rhythm, the waitress had found her own pace. But sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she would pause by the window and stare out at the horizon, lost in thoughts that never reached her lips. She lived in a small rented room above a grocery store. It wasn't much, just a bed, a table, and a second-hand piano that stood near the window. She had found it 1 year earlier at a yard sale, covered in dust and with a few broken keys. The owner wanted to throw it away, but she couldn't let that happen. Something about the old instrument spoke to her, as if it carried memories of forgotten melodies. With the little money she had, she bought it, carried it home piece by piece, and spent nights cleaning and tuning it as best she could. When the world grew quiet, she would sit at that piano and let her fingers wander across the keys. The sounds weren't perfect, but they carried emotion, something real and full of feeling. Those were her most peaceful hours. She never played for anyone else, not even her closest co-workers. It was her secret world, hidden behind the noise of daily life. At the diner, she worked with care. She knew every regular by name, the old man who always ordered black coffee, the mother who came in after school drop-offs, the truck driver who liked his eggs sunny side up. She treated everyone with respect, and in return they treated her kindly. But no one knew what she carried inside. A quiet ache for something more, something she had once loved deeply but left behind. Years ago, before she worked at the diner, her world had been filled with music. She had learned to play piano as a child, sitting beside her grandfather who showed her how to listen, not just to the notes but to the feelings between them. Back then her dream was simple: to perform, to make people feel something through her music. But dreams often fade when life gets hard. When her family faced financial trouble, she gave up her music lessons and started working part-time jobs. Slowly, that dream drifted into the background as survival became her priority. Now her life followed a quiet pattern: work, home, a simple meal, and sometimes late at night a few stolen minutes at the piano. She didn't complain. She was grateful to have work and a roof over her head. Still, deep inside, there was a longing that never went away, a longing for the part of herself that still lived in those melodies. On slow afternoons at the diner, when the sun cast long shadows across the tiled floor, she sometimes caught herself humming softly. It was never loud enough to draw attention, just a quiet tune that seemed to rise from her without thought. The other workers would smile when they heard her, but no one thought much of it. They assumed she liked music like anyone else. One of the older cooks, a kind man who had been there for decades, once told her, "You've got a voice that could calm a storm." She had laughed it off, saying, "It's just something I do to pass the time." But his words stayed with her. The diner itself had a character of its own. The walls were covered with framed photos of old customers. Holiday decorations hung unevenly, and a small upright piano sat in the corner. It hadn't been played in years. Dust gathered on the keys, and the stool had a broken leg. Most of the staff didn't even notice it anymore. It was just part of the furniture, like the old jukebox that no longer worked. Sometimes, when the diner was empty, she would glance toward that piano. It looked lonely, almost forgotten. Once or twice she thought about sitting down and playing a few notes, but the fear of someone walking in stopped her. The piano in her apartment was different. It was her private space, her escape. Here in public she couldn't bring herself to do it. Every day she carried a quiet rhythm inside her, like an invisible song that no one else could hear. The regulars came and went, and she continued serving coffee, smiling and keeping her thoughts to herself. She didn't expect anything to change. She didn't look for attention. She was just doing her best to live a peaceful, honest life. Yet sometimes, as she locked up the diner at night, the cool air brushing against her face, she would look at the stars and wonder if life had more to offer. She didn't dare dream too much. Dreams could hurt when you couldn't reach them. But the question never left her heart. Her co-workers admired her dedication but often wished she'd open up more. They sensed there was something special about her, not in a loud, obvious way, but in how she moved, how she listened, how she seemed to carry stories no one else knew. She had a quiet grace that drew people in, even if they couldn't explain why. At home, after long days on her feet, she would make a simple dinner, light a small candle by the window, and sit by the piano. The city outside was quiet except for distant traffic. Her fingers would hover above the keys, and she'd close her eyes before playing. Each note seemed to carry memories, the joy of childhood lessons, the comfort of her grandfather's voice, the sadness of letting go. She never wrote her music down. It came from her heart, changing slightly every time like a living thing. There were nights when she cried without knowing why. The music would unlock emotions she had kept hidden all day, but after each session she felt lighter, as if the notes had carried away a piece of her burden. On weekends, when others spent their free time socializing or relaxing, she often worked extra shifts. She didn't mind. The diner gave her stability, and in some ways it gave her a sense of belonging. Still, a part of her knew she was meant for something more, though she didn't yet know what that more was. One Sunday morning, as she wiped down the counter, a group of musicians walked in. They were cheerful and full of energy, talking about their weekend gig. She served them coffee and pancakes, listening quietly as they joked about missing instruments and broken strings. For a brief moment she felt a spark, a reminder of the world she once belonged to. When one of them mentioned how hard it was to keep performing after long nights, she nodded knowingly, though they had no idea how deeply she understood. As the day ended and she closed up the diner once again, she stood for a moment near the piano in the corner. The sunlight had faded, leaving only the glow of the neon sign outside. She reached out and touched the dusty keys gently, just enough to feel their texture. Then she smiled softly to herself and turned away. She didn't know that soon. This same piano would change her life. For now, she was just a quiet waitress in a small-town diner, doing her best to make it through each day, unaware that behind her ordinary routine, something extraordinary was waiting to be discovered. The diner was busier than usual that Friday evening. A small crowd had gathered for the weekly open mic night, something the owner started months ago to bring in more customers. Musicians from nearby towns often came to perform a few songs while people enjoyed their food. It wasn't fancy, just a microphone, a small speaker, and the old upright piano in the corner that had become more of a decoration than an instrument. The waitress moved between tables, balancing trays of coffee and plates of burgers, smiling politely as she worked. The noise around her felt comforting in a way. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the familiar scent of fries. It all made the place feel alive. Everything was going smoothly until the owner came rushing from the back looking frustrated. He wiped sweat from his forehead and sighed. "Can you believe this? The band canceled last minute," he said to one of the cooks. "They said their drummer got sick and they can't make it." The cook shrugged. "What are you gonna do? Just play some music from the radio?" The owner groaned. People came for live music, not the jukebox. As the waitress passed by, the owner looked at her and said half-jokingly, "Unless you can sing or play something, I might have to hand you the mic tonight." She laughed nervously, pretending not to take it seriously. "Me? No, I don't perform," she said quickly and walked away. But her heart skipped a beat at the thought. The night continued, but something felt different. The crowd grew restless as they realized there wouldn't be any performers. The owner looked more and more uneasy as customers began asking questions. A few even started leaving. Then one of the regulars, an older man who sat by the counter every night, called out, "Hey, why not let her play? I've heard her hum while working. She's got a voice." The waitress froze, embarrassed, as a few others turned to look at her. "Oh, come on, she's always humming," the man said with a smile. "Give her a chance." The owner chuckled, thinking it was a harmless idea. "What do you say?" he asked. "Just one song to keep the night going. You can use the piano if it still works." She shook her head. No, I can't. Really, I can't. But the crowd, already warmed up by food and laughter, started clapping softly, teasing her to play. "Come on, just one song," someone said. "We won't judge." Her co-workers joined in too, smiling at her encouragingly. "You're always so quiet," one of them said. "Let's hear your voice for once." She stood there, her face turning red. Her hands trembled slightly, but deep down, a quiet spark began to stir. The same spark that used to burn inside her when she was younger, sitting at a piano for hours, lost in music. The owner placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No pressure," he said kindly. "But if you've got something in you, this might be the right time to let it out." She took a deep breath. "Just one song," she whispered. "Then I go back to work." The room erupted in light applause as she slowly made her way to the corner where the piano stood. The stool was still wobbly, and she had to adjust it carefully. Her fingers brushed over the keys, and a thin layer of dust lifted into the air. She pressed one note. It sounded flat but alive. People quieted down. The lights from the neon signs outside glowed through the window, painting soft colors across her face. She hesitated for a moment, her hands resting still on the keys. In her mind, she could hear her grandfather's voice. "Don't think about who's watching. Just play." She closed her eyes and began. The first notes were soft, uncertain, but soon her hands found their rhythm. The melody grew warmer, fuller. Conversations stopped. Forks and knives rested on plates. Every sound in the diner seemed to fade away, replaced by the gentle rise and fall of her music. Then she began to sing, quietly at first, then stronger as her confidence grew. Her voice was pure and emotional, filled with something that came from deep within her. It wasn't just a song. It was a story she had been carrying for years. A story of dreams paused and memories buried. The piano, though old and slightly out of tune, responded beautifully under her touch. The music filled every corner of the diner. Some people closed their eyes. Others smiled without realizing it. The older man at the counter leaned back, completely still, as if afraid to break the spell. Even the cook stepped out from the kitchen, wiping his hands just to listen. When the final note faded, there was silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if waking from a dream, the crowd burst into applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering, their faces glowing with surprise and admiration. The waitress sat there, overwhelmed. She smiled shyly, her cheeks flushed, and whispered, "Thank you," before getting up quickly and heading back behind the counter. But her heart was racing, not with fear, but with something else. Something she hadn't felt in years. The owner approached her, still clapping. "You never told us you could play like that," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "That was incredible," she smiled nervously. "It's just something I used to do. A long time ago?" "Well," he said, glancing around at the happy crowd, "looks like you just saved the night. You've got a gift, you know that?" She didn't answer. She only nodded slightly and went back to refilling coffee cups. But as she worked, she could hear the customers still talking about her performance. "That girl should be on stage," someone said. "I felt that song in my bones," another added. "Who would have thought the waitress could play like a professional?" Her hands shook slightly as she carried a tray, her heart still fluttering from the rush of it all. She had shared a part of herself she thought she'd lost forever. Later, after the diner had closed and the last customer had left, she stayed behind to clean. The piano still sat in the corner, looking different now, almost alive again. She walked over, touched the keys, and smiled softly. The owner came over to lock the door. "You know," he said, "I think you should perform again next week. People loved it. We could make it a regular thing." She laughed quietly. "I'm not a performer," she said. "I just wanted to help tonight," he smiled. "Maybe not yet. But you've got something special. Don't hide it too long." After he left, the diner grew silent. She sat back down at the piano, the dim light from outside spilling across her hands. She pressed a few keys again just to hear the sound. It made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. When she finally walked home that night, the streets were empty. The air was cool and the stars shone brighter than usual. She replayed every moment in her head, the silence, the applause, the feeling of her fingers moving like they used to. At home, she lit a small candle and sat by her old piano. Her reflection in the window looked different now, lighter, more hopeful. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play again, quietly this time, just for herself. She didn't know that a customer had recorded her performance earlier that evening and uploaded it online. She had no idea that by morning her song would reach thousands of people, touching hearts far beyond that small-town diner. All she knew in that quiet moment was that something inside her had awakened, something she thought was gone forever. The morning after that unexpected night felt different. The sun rose the same way, the air smelled the same, but something inside her had changed. As she walked to the diner, the rhythm of her steps seemed lighter, almost in tune with the quiet song that still lingered in her heart. She couldn't stop thinking about the moment she had touched the piano keys and the way the crowd had fallen silent, listening as if the whole world had paused just for her. At the diner, everyone was talking about it. The regular customers smiled at her with admiration. Some teased her kindly, calling her the piano girl. Even the cook, who rarely paid attention to anything outside the kitchen, greeted her with a grin and said, "Didn't know we had a star working here." She blushed and laughed it off, trying to hide how much the words meant to her. "I'm no star," she said. "It was just one song." But deep inside, she knew it was more than that. That one song had awakened a piece of her she thought she'd buried long ago. By the afternoon, the diner was busier than usual. More people came in than on a normal Saturday. Some were strangers who had heard about the waitress who played piano so beautifully. They wanted to see her, maybe even hear her again. She felt shy under their curious eyes, unsure how to handle the sudden attention. As the day went on, she noticed people taking pictures of the piano, and one young man even asked, "Miss, are you the one who played last night?" "My sister showed me the video. It was amazing." She froze. "Video?" she asked softly. He nodded eagerly. "Yeah, someone posted it online. It's everywhere now." "You're getting famous." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't known that someone recorded her. A mix of excitement and fear filled her chest. She didn't like attention, not really. But at the same time, knowing her music had reached others made her feel something powerful, something she couldn't quite name. That evening, after her shift ended, she went straight home. The small room felt quieter than usual. She took off her apron, sat down by her old piano, and opened her phone. It didn't take long to find the video. It was posted by a local diner guest, captioned, "Waitress shocks everyone with her piano skills." She pressed play. The screen showed her sitting at the piano, hesitant at first, then completely lost in the music. The sound was raw, imperfect, but filled with emotion. The comments beneath the video poured in. "This is so beautiful. I cried listening to this. Someone give this girl a record deal. You can feel her soul in every note." She sat there, staring at the screen, tears forming in her eyes. She didn't expect anyone to care, let alone be moved by something that came from such a personal place. For years she had kept her gift hidden, afraid that no one would understand it. But now complete strangers were writing about how it touched their hearts. The next few days at the diner were unlike anything before. Journalists came by asking for interviews. Local radio stations called the owner, hoping to invite her to perform. The attention was overwhelming. She smiled politely but turned most of them down. She didn't know how to deal with the sudden fame. She just wanted to keep things simple. But the world doesn't stay quiet once it discovers something special. One afternoon, a man walked into the diner carrying a camera and a notepad. He introduced himself as a local reporter and asked if he could speak with her. The owner, proud and excited, insisted she agree. She hesitated but finally said yes. They sat in a quiet corner while the lunch rush faded. He asked about her life, how she learned to play, and what made her start again. She answered honestly but humbly. "Music has always been part of me," she said softly. "I stopped for a long time because life got busy. But when I sat at that piano the other night, it felt like I remembered who I was." The reporter smiled. "Do you plan to perform again?" She shrugged gently. "I don't know. I wasn't looking for attention. I just played from my heart." He nodded, clearly moved. "That's what people love about it," he said. "It's real." When the story was published a few days later, the diner became even more popular. Customers lined up outside just to meet her. Some asked for pictures. Others simply thanked her for sharing her gift. It was strange. She hadn't done anything grand or planned, yet her simple act had touched so many. Despite all the noise around her, she stayed grounded. Every morning she opened the diner, wiped the tables, and served coffee as usual. But sometimes, when the rush slowed down, she would sit at the piano for a few minutes. At first, she only played when no one was around, but soon people began gathering to listen again. One night after closing, the owner stayed behind with her. "You know," he said, leaning on the counter, "the piano's in better shape when you play it. It used to sound tired. Now it sounds alive." She smiled, her fingers brushing the keys lightly. Maybe it just needed someone to care about it. He looked at her thoughtfully. "You should think about taking this further," he said. "You've got something special. Don't let fear hold you back." His words stayed with her long after she went home. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by her piano, looking out the window at the quiet town. She thought about all the years she had spent hiding her music, convincing herself it was too late. Now it seemed the world was reminding her that it wasn't. The following weekend she agreed to play again at the diner's open mic. This time the crowd was even bigger. People from neighboring towns came just to see her. She felt nervous, her hands shaking slightly as she sat down at the piano. But when she looked around and saw the smiling faces, she felt warmth in her chest. She started to play. The first few notes floated through the room, soft and slow, then built into a melody that filled every corner. Her voice was steady now, confident, emotional, and honest. The song spoke of hope, of finding light after years of silence. The audience listened quietly, completely still, as if afraid to miss a single note. Even children stopped fidgeting. When she finished, there was a long pause before everyone stood up, clapping and cheering louder than ever before. This time, she didn't run off in embarrassment. She stayed there smiling, letting herself feel the moment. She realized then that music wasn't just something she had lost. It was something she was meant to share. After the show, an older woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "My husband used to play," she said softly. "He passed away last year, but when you played tonight, I felt him with me again." "Thank you." The waitress reached out and held the woman's hands. "Thank you for listening," she said gently. That night, as she walked home under the stars, she felt a deep peace she hadn't known in years. It wasn't about fame or attention anymore. It was about connection, the kind that music could create without words. She didn't know where this path would lead her, but for the first time, she was ready to follow it. The piano, once just an old piece of furniture, had opened a door she thought was locked forever. And as she reached her small room and sat once more at her own piano, she smiled and whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." The soft sound of her fingers on the keys drifted out the window and into the night, a promise to the world and to herself that she would never hide her gift again. The video of her playing spread faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, it had already been shared hundreds of times. People commented about how her music felt pure and real, something that touched their hearts in a world filled with noise. At first, she didn't even know it was happening. She had gone to work like any other day, ready to serve coffee and clean tables. But when she walked into the diner that morning, the way everyone looked at her felt different. Her co-workers smiled the moment she entered. The cook waved from the kitchen, holding up his phone. "You're famous now," he said with a grin. She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He turned his phone toward her. There it was. Her video on a social media page with thousands of views and comments flooding in. She stared at the screen in disbelief, her hands frozen in midair. "I didn't even know someone was recording," she whispered. "Well, they did," the cook said, "and everyone loves it. You're all over town news now." The owner came out from the back holding a newspaper in one hand. "You made the front page of the local section," he said proudly. "They called you the hidden musician of Main Street." Her face turned pink and she shook her head, embarrassed. "I'm just a waitress," she said softly. He smiled. "Not anymore, you're not." That day, the diner stayed full from morning to night. People came in just to see her, some pretending to order coffee just so they could catch a glimpse of the young woman who had made the town proud. Others asked if she would play again. At first, she said no. She wasn't ready. But as the chatter grew and people's smiles became warmer, she started to feel that same spark again, the one that had come alive during her first performance. By lunchtime, someone brought flowers and left them on the counter with a small note. "Your music gave me hope. Thank you." She read the message twice before tucking it into her apron pocket. It was simple, but it made her eyes water. It was strange to think that a song she played almost by accident could mean so much to someone else. That night, when the diner slowed down, the owner approached her gently. "They're asking again," he said with a smile. "Maybe just one song?" She looked at the piano in the corner. The same piano she had been too shy to touch for years now sat shining in the soft light, freshly cleaned and tuned. Someone had even fixed the wobbly stool. She hesitated, biting her lip. "I don't know what to play," the owner shrugged. "Play whatever comes from your heart. That's what they loved the first time." She took a deep breath, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked slowly to the piano. The crowd quieted the moment they saw her. Even the children sat still, sensing that something special was about to happen. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She closed her eyes and let the sound come naturally. The first note was soft, and then another and another. Soon the melody filled the room, gentle but full of emotion. It was a song about longing, about finding light after darkness. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just played honestly. As she sang, people leaned forward, listening closely. Some smiled, others looked lost in thought, and one older woman near the window quietly wiped a tear from her eye. The moment felt alive, fragile, and magical all at once. When she finished, there was a heartbeat of silence and then thunderous applause. People stood clapping and cheering. The sound filled the diner, echoing off the walls. The waitress looked around, stunned. She hadn't expected this. Her chest tightened with emotion as she tried to smile through the tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling. Someone from the back shouted, "Play another one." She laughed nervously. "Maybe next time," she said, still catching her breath. After the crowd settled, a young couple approached her. "That was beautiful," the woman said. "We've been having a rough time lately, but your song reminded us that there's still beauty in small things." The waitress didn't know what to say. She just smiled and replied, "I'm glad it helped." Later that evening, after everyone had left, she sat alone at the piano again. The lights were dim, and the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. She pressed a few keys softly, lost in thought. It was strange that the same music that had been her private escape had now connected her with so many people. The owner came over quietly and placed a cup of tea beside her. "You've got something real," he said. "People feel it when you play. That's rare." She looked down at her hands. "I never thought anyone would listen." "They didn't just listen," he said with a smile. "They felt it. There's a big difference." That night, as she walked home under the streetlights, the world seemed bigger. The air was cool and filled with the faint scent of rain. She could still hear the echo of applause in her head. For the first time in years, she felt proud of herself, not for being perfect, but for being honest. The following week, the story spread beyond town. Radio stations talked about her. A small TV crew came to the diner to film a segment. She felt nervous sitting in front of the camera, unsure what to say. But when they asked her how it felt to go viral, she answered quietly, "I didn't mean for it to happen. I just wanted to share something that was in my heart." Her humility made people love her even more. The video reached hundreds of thousands of views. Comments flooded in from other towns, even from other countries. Some said her song gave them peace. Others said it inspired them to chase their own dreams again. It all felt unreal. She wasn't used to attention. At night, she would sit by her small window and read some of the comments, smiling to herself. One message stood out. "You reminded me that simple things can be extraordinary when they come from the heart." She read that line again and again, her eyes shining in the faint light. The next morning, she woke up early and went straight to her piano. She didn't play for an audience this time. She played for herself. The music poured out softly, like a conversation between her past and her present. As the days went by, more people visited the diner, travelers, families, and musicians who wanted to meet her. Some brought instruments and played along with her in the evenings. The diner turned into a place filled with laughter and music. The owner eventually bought a new sign that read, "Home of the Piano Waitress." It made her blush every time she saw it. But secretly, she was proud. Even with all the fame and attention, she stayed humble. She still cleaned tables, took orders, and served coffee with the same gentle smile. But every time she touched the piano, she reminded herself where it all began, in a small-town diner, with an old broken instrument and a dream she thought she had lost. One night, As she played softly for a few late customers, she noticed a little girl sitting near the front watching her intently. The girl couldn't have been more than 7. When the waitress finished, the child walked up shyly and said, "I want to play like you one day." The waitress knelt beside her and smiled. "You can," she said. "Just don't ever stop believing that you can." The girl nodded, holding her mother's hand, and smiled back. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. As she watched them leave, the waitress realized something. Her music wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt small or forgotten, everyone who needed a reason to hope again. And as she turned back to the piano and played one last song before closing, her heart felt full. The sound flowed through the empty diner and out into the quiet night, carrying with it the truth she had finally learned. Sometimes, all it takes is one song to remind the world that beauty still exists. The days that followed felt like a dream she didn't remember falling asleep to. Her life had changed almost overnight, yet she still woke up early every morning, tied her apron, and walked to the diner like she always did. But now, when she stepped through the door, people smiled at her differently. They didn't just see a waitress anymore. They saw someone who had touched their hearts with her music. Even though she still greeted everyone politely and served their food with care, she could feel the shift around her. Customers whispered softly when she passed. Some even brought small gifts, flowers, cards, little handwritten notes thanking her for her music. At first it felt strange. She had never been the center of attention before. She had spent most of her life blending into the background, quietly doing her work. But now people wanted to know her story. They wanted to understand who she was, where she had learned to play like that, and why someone with such talent was working in a small-town diner instead of standing on a stage. She didn't like talking about herself, but as more people asked, she began to open up little by little. It started one quiet afternoon when a woman from the local paper stopped by. The woman didn't have a camera or a team, just a small notepad and a warm smile. "Can I ask you something personal?" the reporter said gently. "You don't have to answer if it's too much." The waitress looked up from the counter, nervous but kind. "Sure," she said softly. The reporter smiled. "Why do you think your music touches people the way it does?" For a moment, the waitress didn't know how to answer. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had scrubbed dishes, carried plates, and played songs from the heart. Then she said quietly, "Maybe because I don't play to impress anyone. I just play what I feel. Life hasn't been easy, but when I play, it's like everything heavy turns light again." The reporter nodded, writing down her words. "That's beautiful," she said. "Did you always play?" The waitress took a deep breath. "When I was little, yes. My grandfather taught me. We didn't have much, but we had an old piano in his house. He used to say music was the one thing that could heal anything. When I played, he'd close his eyes and say, 'Don't stop, the world needs more of this.'" Her voice grew softer as she continued. "But after he passed away, everything changed. My family went through hard times. Bills piled up and I had to work instead of study. Music became something I only did in my mind, not out loud." The reporter listened quietly, touched by her honesty. "And now?" "Now," the waitress said, glancing toward the diner's piano, "I guess I'm finding my way back." The story ran the next morning with a simple headline, "The Waitress Who Found Her Voice Again." It wasn't a big story, but people loved it. They saw not just her talent, but her heart. Soon messages poured in from strangers who said her story reminded them not to give up on their dreams. One man wrote that he had stopped painting years ago after losing his job, but after hearing her story, he picked up his brushes again. A young girl sent her a letter that said, "I want to learn piano like you. My mom says I can do it if I believe in myself." Reading those words brought tears to her eyes. She had never thought her pain or her journey could help anyone else. For so long, she believed her story didn't matter, that it was too ordinary, too quiet. But now, it was touching people in ways she never expected. At the diner, the piano became more than just an instrument. It became a symbol. Customers began leaving small notes under its lid, little thank yous and messages of hope. Some even left music sheets asking if she could play them next time. One evening after closing, she sat alone by the piano and read through some of the notes. They weren't just about her music. They were about people's lives, struggles, and memories. Some wrote about lost loved ones, others about rediscovered dreams. She realized that what connected them all was emotion. Music wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real. The owner, who had been quietly watching from the counter, walked over with a gentle smile. "You've done more for this town in a few weeks than most people do in a lifetime," he said. "People come here not just for food anymore. They come for a feeling. For something warm." "You gave them that?" She shook her head. "I didn't plan any of this," she said softly. "Maybe that's why it worked," he replied. "Because it came from the heart." In the weeks that followed, she was invited to perform at a small community event. It wasn't anything grand, just an evening concert at the local hall to raise money for a children's charity. At first she hesitated. She had never played outside the diner before. The thought of standing on a real stage scared her, but then she thought of her grandfather's words. "Don't stop. The world needs more of this." So she said yes. The night of the performance, she wore a simple dress and no makeup. She didn't want to look like someone else. She wanted to be herself. When she walked onto the stage, the bright lights made her blink. But then she saw the faces in the crowd, familiar faces from the diner, her co-workers, the old man who always ordered coffee, the little girl who once said she wanted to play like her. She smiled nervously, sat at the piano and whispered to herself, "Just play from the heart." The first few notes echoed softly through the hall. Then came her voice, clear, full of warmth and emotion. The audience listened, completely silent. She played not for fame or attention, but for every person who had ever doubted themselves, for every dream left behind, for every heart that needed healing. When the last note faded, the applause was deafening. People stood up, cheering and crying. She looked out at them through tear-filled eyes and realized something. Music wasn't just her escape anymore. It was her way of giving back. After the show, people surrounded her with hugs and gratitude. An elderly man approached her and said, "You reminded me of my late wife. She used to play just like that." For a few minutes, I felt like she was here again. "Thank you." She couldn't find words. She simply held his hands and nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. That night, when she returned home, she sat at her own piano by the window. The city lights shimmered outside and the air was still. She thought about everything that had happened, how a single night at the diner had changed everything. She began to play again, softly. The melody carried a sense of peace and gratitude. Every note felt like a thank you, to her grandfather, to the people who believed in her, and to herself for finally daring to share her gift again. As she played, she realized something even deeper. The gift she had was never really lost. It had just been waiting for the right moment to be heard. And now that it had found its way back into the world, she knew she would never hide it again. The music flowed through the quiet room like a gentle river, washing away the years of silence. And as she played into the night, she smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one built not on fame, but on love, courage, and the magic of being true to herself. The morning after the concert felt different from any other morning she had ever known. The sun seemed brighter, the air lighter, as if the world itself was quietly celebrating with her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was just waking up to another shift at the diner. She felt like she was waking up to a new life, one she hadn't dared to dream of before. When she arrived at the diner that day, people were already waiting outside. Some were locals who had been there the night before, holding coffee cups and talking excitedly about the performance. Others were strangers who had driven in from nearby towns after watching her video online. The crowd clapped when she walked in, and though her face turned red, she couldn't help but smile. The owner met her at the door with a proud grin. "Our star has returned," he joked, though his voice carried real warmth. She laughed, shaking her head. "I'm still just me," she said, tying on her apron like always. But the truth was, she wasn't the same anymore. Something inside her had changed. The music she'd once hidden now had a life of its own. As the day went on, people came to the diner not just for food, but to meet her, to hear the girl who had reminded them of hope. Some wanted autographs, others simply wanted to shake her hand. She tried to make time for everyone, thanking them for their kind words. She never let it feel like fame. To her, it was gratitude. Later that afternoon, a man in a suit walked in carrying a small folder. He introduced himself politely as someone who managed local talent. He had been at her concert and wanted to help her share her music beyond the diner. He talked about recording opportunities, local radio shows, and even community tours. She listened carefully, her heart fluttering between excitement and disbelief. "I'm not sure I'm ready for all that," she admitted softly. The man smiled kindly. "You already are," he said. "You've got something people need, and not just a voice, but truth. That's rare." That night she went home and sat at her piano again. The house was quiet except for the soft sound of her fingers touching the keys. She thought about what the man had said. She thought about the people who came to the diner, the ones who wrote her letters and the children who said she inspired them. She didn't want to chase fame, but she wanted to keep giving something meaningful. So she decided to take a small step forward. A week later, she agreed to record a few songs at a local studio. The place was simple, nothing fancy, but when she sat down at the piano, everything felt right. The microphone captured not just her notes, but her emotion, the story of every hardship, every quiet night, every dream she had almost let go of. The songs were shared online, and once again people listened. Not because of a record label or promotion, but because they felt her heart in every word. Her music reached families, workers, students, people who needed comfort in their own struggles. Soon, invitations began to arrive. A nearby school asked her to play for their students. A retirement home wanted her to visit and share her songs with the elderly residents. Each performance reminded her that this wasn't about being a star. It was about connecting with people. Everywhere she went, she heard new stories of people who had given up on their dreams and started again after hearing her music. Some told her they began painting again. Others said they started writing or learning instruments. She realized her story was no longer just hers. It had become part of something bigger, something shared. One afternoon, as she was helping close the diner, the owner asked her, "Do you ever think you'll leave this place?" She looked around, at the worn booths, the old coffee machine, the piano in the corner. "This place gave me back my life," she said. "No matter where I go, I'll always come back here. It's part of who I am." The owner nodded, smiling. "That's good to hear. The piano wouldn't sound the same without you." Months passed and her world continued to grow. She played at local theaters, small festivals, and charity events. But no matter how big the crowd got, she always carried the same humble spirit. She made sure to greet people, to listen to their stories, to remind them that everyone has something beautiful inside them, even if it's hidden for a while. One evening, after returning from a performance in another town, she found a letter waiting for her at the diner. It was from a young woman who had been struggling to find direction in life. The letter said, "I watched your video when I felt like giving up. Seeing you reminded me that it's never too late to start over. Thank you for helping me believe in myself again." She sat down by the piano and read it twice. Her eyes filled with quiet tears. That letter, like so many before it, reminded her why she played. Not for applause, not for recognition, but for moments like this. The next morning, she arrived early before the diner opened. The air smelled of rain and the streets were quiet. She lifted the piano lid and began to play softly. The song was slow, peaceful, filled with warmth. It wasn't a famous song or one she had written to impress anyone. It was just something from her heart. The cook walked out from the kitchen and listened. "That's new," he said gently. She nodded. "It's called A New Beginning," she said with a shy smile. He smiled back. "Sounds perfect for you." As the day went on, customers filled the diner again, laughter echoing against the walls. Someone asked her to play that new song, and she did, this time louder, stronger, with more confidence. People stopped eating and turned to listen, the same way they had on that first magical night. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment before bursting into applause. But she didn't look for praise anymore. She looked around the diner, at the faces smiling back at her, at the joy in their eyes, and she felt at peace. She realized that her journey wasn't about escaping her ordinary life. It was about transforming it, finding beauty in the small moments and courage in the quiet ones. The music she once thought she had lost had always been there, waiting for her to believe in it again. In the months that followed, she balanced her new opportunities with her simple life. She traveled, recorded, and performed, but she always came back home. The diner, with its worn tables and friendly chatter, remained her heart's anchor, and sometimes when she sat at the piano late at night, she thought of her grandfather. She imagined him sitting beside her, eyes closed, smiling as he used to. She could almost hear his voice saying, "See? I told you the world needed this." She would smile, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, and whisper, "You were right." Then she would play softly, beautifully, and letting the notes float into the night, a reminder that even the quietest dreams can one day find their way back into the light. Her story wasn't one of fame or riches. It was a story of rediscovery, of courage, and of kindness, a story about a woman who reminded the world that no gift is ever truly lost. It just waits for the right moment to be found again. And as long as there were hearts to touch and songs to play, she knew her journey would never truly end, because music, like hope, never fades, it only grows stronger when it's shared.